The ranking of WordPress freedom compiled by Reporter Senza Frontiere sees at the first place countries such as Finland and Norway, Estonia and the Netherlands, which are the main legislation points of those states that allow them to reach these positions.
I think what's important is the fact that there are no regulations to become a journalist. Journalism should be the freest of all professions, with very little conditions. I always say that there should be no condition on a title, on a degree, an academic title, although it's good for journalists to professionalize, but that doesn't mean it should be a condition. Most journalists study something different anyway, and not necessarily journalism. Secondly, I think it's important that journalists form associations, professional associations, but I don't think belonging or participating in a professional association should also be a condition imposed by a state. And thirdly, they should never be forced to register with government officials. It may be convenient for journalists to register so they can have access to public events, but it should never be imposed as a condition. These are the most important issues because, again, journalism only works if a journalist is free to document, to investigate, and then to make opinions about the events they're watching. And that cannot be done if the state generates all these regulations that condition it. So it's the freeness and the lack of all these conditions and regulations to practice journalism. In human rights, this is the position of freedom of expression. I believe there are limitations. This is important to mention, and the limitations are established in Article 19 as well. Limitations in terms of protection of national security, public order, public morals, and public health, it says, or the prohibition of hate speech on the basis hate or incitement to hatred, hostility, and violence. Those prohibitions are there in terms of human rights, but those are the exception. The norm is the openness and the freeness in which everyone should enjoy freedom of expression, and specifically journalists should enjoy freedom of the press.
On the basis of this, comparing the Italian situation to the European Union, and in particular to the countries mentioned before, what are the critical points and the differences?
I don't want to qualify Italy yet, because I would like to come to Italy officially in a visit. As a matter of fact, I would like to send a message to the government, to Prime Minister Monti and to the Foreign Minister, that I would like to be invited to do an official mission, complete mission, to look at all forms. But I would say that there are a couple of issues that I know through civil society and my friends in the legal profession here that worry me. For instance, one is that the AGCOM nomination of members was done with no consultation with civil society. And I think this is not good. It doesn't make a process transparent. And it was done under the same old rules that existed under the Berlusconi government. And this is bad because the idea is that this is a transition government. There should have been something different, more openness, more consultation. Secondly, Italy still does not have an access to information law, which most countries in Europe have, and even the European Union has a directive on. And I think this is very important because this is a sign of transparency and strengthens democracy, and it strengthens the role that the free press plays in transparency and democracy. And this is a legislation that Parliament in Italy should look at. I believe that there should be decriminalized defamation. This is something I support all around the world, like all the other issues that I'm mentioning. Defamation is a way of intimidation of the press and should not be used. I think defamation should be a civil action that could basically allow for some form of redress, like public apology or some form of correction, but not as a criminal case that could put someone in jail, because that is effectively intimidating the press. That is defamation, libel, and slander. I believe that public officials, especially the higher level officials, should not have any form of defamation that they could raise, because they're open by the nature of their work. They're open to analysis. I always say the public office comes with public scrutiny, and public scrutiny comes hand in hand with public criticism. And any public official should know when they come into office that that's going to happen, and that this is one of the norms of their function, of their public function as public servants. And maybe finally, I think that I believe that there should be some legislation to deregulate registries. I don't think any media should have to register in any way. This is a limitation. The same way I don't believe any journalist should have to register in any way or should satisfy conditions. I think Italy should be as open and as free as the rest of Europe. There's no reason why it should be different. So media should be able to exist freely, and journalists should be able to practice their profession freely. It doesn't even make sense anymore, because you can have conditions for written media or for broadcasting, but all of a sudden anyone can do new media and the new technologies over internet. So you might as well not have those conditions, because they won't be able to apply them across the board. So I believe that it would be good to modernize Italy. And this is why these are some of the issues that worry me. And like I was saying at the beginning, why I would like to do an official visit, an official mission to Italy, and to look at this and more in terms of the participation of citizens in the debate of freedom of expression and public broadcasting and public media.
In your opinion, is there an affinity between the draft law, which was known as gag law of 2010, and the one issued in these weeks? Is the new technical government continuing the last one, or did the new draft law, or is more a symbol of searching a new path in the field of the regulation of information on the internet?
I think that this is exactly what I would like to do a visit. Instead of commenting in general terms of the change, I would like to come here officially and sit down with government officials and with members of parliament and to look at all these changes and regulations. What is very clear for me is that this government, which was always seen as a transition government, has to fulfill the expectations of the population in actually representing real change. It's not a Passover government. It's not a government that only transfers power from one time to another with the same conditions. It should be a transformation, a real transition to a better form of government with human rights as a priority. So what I would like to do is to come here and do a more deeper analysis.
So if the new draft was approved, which are the main consequences on the Italian media, and which media platform will suffer most? Could you tell us possible future scenario?
Well, I think it's important to, the only regulations that I believe should exist are those limitations established by human rights standards. The prohibition in Article 20, I mean, the limitation established in Article 19, like I said, for national security, public order, public morals, and public health. In Article 20, for the protection of individuals against incitement to hatred, hostility, and violence on the basis of race, nationality, and religion. But there are other instruments like the optional protocol of the Convention on the Rights of the Child on child pornography to protect children against sexual exploitation and trafficking of children, which should be a crime. That one should be criminalized and investigated. Or the Convention on the Prevention of the Crime of Genocide, where incitement to genocide should also be a crime. And then there's resolutions of the General Assembly on incitement to terrorism, or the resolutions on incitement to organized crime. So I think all these elements should be considered into limitations. But aside from those elements that are already in human rights standards that can actually harm the rights of others, in general, all internet platforms should be as free as possible, without limitation, should be the piazza pubblica for people to meet and to relate and to communicate with no restrictions. So
continuing to play on the dichotomy past and future, and also going to your personal and professional experiences, what are the strategies adopted to carry on the fight for human rights? What will be the future?
Well, I believe that the future is linked to how much can we defend freedom of expression. As we always say in human rights, all rights are equal, all rights are universal, all rights are interdependent and interrelated. But some human rights are facilitators of others, and freedom of expression is precisely that. Freedom of expression is a way to establish transparency, is a way to strengthen participation in a democratic society and therefore to strengthen democracy. Freedom of expression is a way to satisfy individual desires of creativeness, art, or any other form of expression. Freedom of expression is a way to satisfy cultural differences and cultural diversity, because it's the way that peoples express their cultures. But very specifically, I think, also freedom of expression is a way to build peace in the world by growing a better understanding amongst people. UNESCO has in its constitution in Article 1 that this is 2 years before the Universal Declaration, that it was established as an institution to build peace in the world by facilitating the free flow of ideas and information among peoples of the world. And I love that phrase, because it means that peace has to be based on that level of communication, that free flow of ideas and information, so we get to know each other and we get to build solidarity or fraternity, as the French Revolution said, among peoples of the world. But that needs information, and information needs freedom of expression.
In the decades of activism, you had collected a lot of experience. Which are the most significant things you learned?
Well, number one is never keep anything silent. I am now the rapporteur on freedom of expression, but this has always been my motivation. There was I remember a photograph that I saw of a sign behind Nelson Mandela's desk in South Africa that said, "Evil triumphs when good people keep silent, when the good keep silent." And this is true. Silence will always allow evil to grow and to get worse. And the only way to demand justice and to enhance human rights is never to be silent, always to raise your voice. And raising voices means, for me, especially raising voices of sectors that are not often heard, raising voices of women to break impunity on violence against women, raising voices of children, because for me, freedom of expression is something you learn from the early ages when you're a young girl or a young boy. Freedom of expression of people with disability, because they have an equal level of participation in society than any other, and equal rights. Or raising voices of minorities, whether they be racial, linguistic, or religious minorities, where the majority of the society tends to silence them. So for me, all these voices are what really makes a concert of voices that we should hear. And this has probably always been my main motivation.
According to what you said before, how is it possible to apply what you have learned in your past experiences on a country as Italy, which is ranked at the 61st place in the world press freedom?
Let me wait for the response I get from Prime Minister Monti and the invitation I want, and let me come officially in a visit and meet with civil society here again and have a free exchange of views, and then I will answer. I am very hopeful that this will be allowed, and this will be the attitude of any rapporteur, any mandate holder, is not to criticize, is to build together with people of the country. So I would come in the best intention of criticizing that has to be changed, but of supporting that has to be supported, and supporting the government's effort to build a difference and to build a real transition in Italy. So let me see if I get the invitation, and when I am here, let's meet again and I will answer this question.
Which countries experienced the most virtuous web activism in order to shake the public opinion on reforms that should be done to protect and improve the web?
I don't know which are the most, because I don't want to qualify. I normally don't like to compare one country to another. I believe there's a comparison to be made. Each country should compare itself to its own history, whether we're improving or whether we're decreasing. And every country knows specifically, and every society knows specifically whether things are getting better or getting worse or just staying the same. And I think this is a moment of evaluation in every country. But I can mention a couple of examples of good practices. For instance, in Colombia, civil society organizations, human rights organizations, and journalists associations were able to build with the government, pushing the government, a mechanism of protection of journalists that has worked very well and has saved lives of journalists. Even though there's tremendous degree of violence, journalists are now being protected by a collective multi-stakeholder mechanism. Or in Uruguay, where now they're about to pass a telecommunications law, which has been debated, but was been pushed by civil society, but has been debated by all sectors, the business sector, the media, the internet and all the new technologies, plus the government officials, plus civil society in different sectors. Everyone that wanted to participate has a chance to be there. When this law gets passed in Parliament, it should be a consensus law. There will always be someone against it, but it's the most wonderful thing I've ever seen. And it is a very, very progressive law. But it was possible, especially on protection of children and media, for instance. So it became very progressive because it is a consensus of society. My feeling is that those experiences where society is consulted, where people feel they have a voice and they have a participation, are the most solid examples of change and of democracy, and actually strengthen the country.